Hello everybody and welcome to my review for Shin Megami Tensei Soul Hackers 2. I recently played through Soul Hackers 2 and after finishing the game I wanted to give my thoughts on the game and wanted to talk about if I think this game is worth buying and how good the game is overall. Soul Hackers 2, while sharing the same name as Soul Hackers, really doesn't have that much in common with the original game. Soul Hackers 2, you do not need to play the first Soul Hackers game in order to understand the story, the world, or the characters of the game. So if you're worried if you haven't played Soul Hackers 1 and you're thinking of buying Soul Hackers 2, you do not need to play through Soul Hackers 1 to understand what is going on in Soul Hackers 2. Soul Hackers 2 has a completely different world, a completely different cast of characters, and the story really doesn't have that much in common with the original Soul Hackers. The gameplay is also very different from the original as well. The original Soul Hackers was a first-person RPG, meanwhile Soul Hackers 2 is more modern and is a third-person RPG. Soul Hackers 2 takes place in a near-future city where humans live, and with humans being able to form pacts with monsters become summoners that can summon those monsters. There's a war going on between two factions called the Yatagarasu and the Phantom Society. The Yatagarasu are the good guys and the Phantom Society are the bad guys. The two factions are trying to capture 5 covenants, which are 5 magic beings that can summon a great power to be able to save the world or to destroy the world. An AI artificial intelligence program called ION sees the conflict going on and makes 2 artificial beings, one of them being named Ringo and then the other one being named Fig. You play as Ringo throughout the game and she is the main character in Soul Hackers 2. And with these 2 artificial beings, they send them into the human world to help humans and to be able to save the world. Ringo, on her quest to save the world, eventually meets Arrow, Melody, and Saizo, 3 other people she teams up with to save the world. These 4 characters in the game make up the main cast of characters that you'll be playing as throughout Soul Hackers 2. Now that we've talked about what the story and world of Soul Hackers 2 is about, let's start talking about what the game plays like. Soul Hackers 2 is a turn-based RPG, and it is a game where you have 2 different things that you'll be primarily doing. So you got the dungeons where you'll be fighting enemies and getting into battles and winning battles and leveling up and getting your character stronger. And then you got the town area where you'll be going to stores, buying items, and then also seeing story cutscenes and then usually advancing the story there. In Soul Hackers 2, there's no roadmap that you go across like old school RPGs. Instead, you bring up a list of locations and then you select a location from the list and you go to that place. So once you get into a dungeon, you can pretty much explore by running around areas. Soul Hackers 2 does not have random encounters and instead you can see enemies as you're traveling through areas. You can swing the main character Ringo's sword to knock enemies down and then run into the enemy to start a battle. Once a battle begins in Soul Hackers 2, you'll see that the combat is turn-based. Combat is done with 4 party members in the game. During battle, you can either do a regular attack, use magic abilities, use items, or you can try to run from the battle. So you might be asking, what separates this game's combat from other RPGs' combat? The main thing that Soul Hackers 2's battle system has going for it that is unique is a mechanic called the Sabbath attacks. So when you hit an enemy weakness in battle, not only do you do a lot more damage to them, but you also build up what is called a stack. Each time you hit enemy weakness, you build up another stack. Once you hit at least 1 enemy weakness, you build up 1 stack. At the end of the round, a Sabbath attack will happen where all the monsters that your characters have equipped will attack the enemy monsters and do a lot of damage to them. And if you build up more stacks, the more stacks that you build, the more damage a Sabbath attack does at the end of the round. Now, the Sabbath attack mechanic I think is a fun mechanic. It's of course fun to hit enemy weaknesses, do a lot of damage, but the problem I have with it is that it doesn't really change the way that you play the game. So in other Shin Megami Tensei games, when you hit enemy weakness like in SMT3 Nocturne or Shin Megami Tensei 5 or 4, you get an additional turn, and you can do a lot of things with that additional turn, and that can really change the way that you play battles. But in Soul Hackers 2, the Sabbath attack system It basically rewards you for what you're already rewarded for doing, so you're of course going to always try to hit enemy weaknesses in battle to do as much damage to them as possible. But all the Sabbath attack does is it just makes you hitting the enemy weakness get more rewarded for doing so by doing that big attack at the end of that round of combat. The other Shin Megami Tensei games like Shin Megami Tensei 3 or Shin Megami Tensei 4 makes you really think a lot more about what you're doing in combat, because when you get that extra turn, you got to be like, okay, do I go and heal somebody? Do I go and attack? You have to make that kind of strategic decision making. And in Soul Hackers 2, it's just you hit enemy weakness and you do even more damage with the Sabbath attack for hitting the enemy weakness. And there's no real additional strategy that this mechanic adds to the combat. And so, yeah, it's a cool, fun mechanic to do, but it doesn't really change the way that you play the battles. Eventually, once you defeat all enemies in a battle, you will then be rewarded with EXP and money. Soul Hackers 2 has a traditional leveling system like a lot of other RPGs. The max level of the game is 99, and when a character gets enough EXP from battling and defeating enemies, they will level up. Now I want to talk about character customization in Soul Hackers 2. So in this game, basically there's no traditional weapon or armor system like in other RPGs. So in other RPG games, you'll go to like a weapon store, you'll buy a new weapon for a character, or you buy a new armor from an armor store from them, or you go to a dungeon and you open up a treasure chest and you get a better weapon or armor for them. There's none of that in this game. Instead, in Soul Hackers 2, every character gets their own computer. You can go to a store and you can upgrade their computer and give them something like attack plus 3 or attack plus 2. And the thing is, I felt that the upgrade system in this game really was not that good of a system. It really didn't make me feel like I was getting a lot more powerful. Compared to an RPG where you buy a new weapon or you find a weapon in a treasure chest out in a dungeon and then you equip it and then that weapon gives you like plus 20 attack power. You equip it and then you go into battle and you hit an enemy, you can see a big difference in the damage that you're doing. But in Soul Hackers 2, when you're getting an upgrade like plus 2 attack, you really don't feel like you're getting that much more powerful. And that's why I feel like the upgrade system they put in the game is a massive failure. Aside from the upgrade system for your computer on each character, you can also make each character stronger and customize them by getting a new monster for them to summon in battle. So Soul Hackers 2, the monster system in the game is a lot like the Personas from the Persona games. Basically, you get a monster, or as they're called in the Soul Hackers 2 world, they're called demons. So you get a new monster, and basically you either get one from exploring a dungeon, and then you talk to one of your monsters in the dungeon who's out exploring, and they'll give you either an item or a monster, or they'll recover your health. And then the alternative way, and what you can also do with monsters, is you can go to an area called the Goma Den. At the Goma Den, you can combine monsters via a process called fusion and make stronger monsters and carry over skills from the monsters that were combined to the new monster you just made. You then equip that monster onto a character, and that character gets all of the monster's abilities that they have, and their resistances and weaknesses change to whatever that monster is weak or resistant to. So the game has a lot of customization like other Shin Megami Tensei games when it comes to the monster customization aspect of the game. And this is one of the strongest points of Soul Hackers 2, is all the different monsters you can get and customize your characters with. And each time you switch to a new monster, you're getting brand new abilities. It adds a lot of variety to the gameplay and is definitely one of the highlights of the gameplay. Now, probably the biggest thing I really need to talk about with Soul Hackers 2, and probably one of the biggest criticisms you've heard from a lot of people about the game, is the dungeons that are in the game. The dungeons in Soul Hackers 2 are very bad. There's maybe less than 10 dungeons in the entire main story. In a game where you have less than 10 dungeons, you really have to focus on quality over quantity. And in Soul Hackers 2, they really failed with the dungeon design. The dungeons are very repetitive, they're not that interesting, and there's a lot of flaws with them that I'm going to start getting into right now. So the first dungeon of Soul Hackers 2 is a shipping docks. You're basically at some docks with shipping containers everywhere, and you go through there. Well, later in the game, There's a second dungeon that uses literally the same type of environment. It's another dock with shipping containers. And you go there and the entire dungeon is one screen with no puzzles. And you just follow the path to the end. And you get to the end in like 15 to 20 minutes and then you fight the boss. At another part of the game, you go to a subway dungeon, you beat that dungeon, and then the next dungeon right after that is another subway dungeon. And again, when you have less than 10 dungeons in the main story, you gotta really focus on making each one of them stand out, and having a dungeon with the same environment with no real unique stuff from the previous one is not a good way to do that. And this is one of the biggest problems with Soul Hackers 2. Another really bad dungeon is the side dungeon called the Matrix. So the Matrix is the optional side dungeon you can do in the game where you go into different characters' memories and you go into their Matrix world. The other three characters aside from Ringo, Arrow, Melody, and Saizo each have their own Matrix world that you can go into. And then you go through the floors in them. But the thing is, despite there being three different characters who each have their own Matrix world, all three of them look the exact same. So if you go into Saizo's Matrix world, it's the same blue place with blocks flying around. If you go into Melody's Matrix, it's the same blue place with blocks flying around. And Arrow's is the exact same as well. Later in the game, there's actually a main story part where you have to go into Arrow's Matrix to see his memories. And the dungeon for that main story part of the Matrix is the same as the optional areas. It's the exact same design. So overall, the dungeons are just not very good in Soul Hackers 2. A lot of reused environments, a lot of uninteresting places that you go to, not enough variety, and the dungeons are just really, really bad in this game, are one of the biggest flaws with Soul Hackers 2. So in terms of the music, I felt that the soundtrack of the game overall wasn't very good. I think that the main battle theme for battles was good, but outside the main battle theme of the game, none of the area themes are memorable to me. The rest of the soundtrack, aside from like the main battle theme and maybe a boss theme or two, is completely unmemorable. Now, in terms of the story, the main plot isn't anything like super original. Soul Hackers 2, it pretty much has the typical RPG plot where you're trying to save the world. And the main characters of the game, most of them were not very interesting. They were kind of just okay to me. The only one of the four main characters I really liked a lot was Saizo. I thought he was a pretty cool character, but the other characters in the game were kind of boring and they didn't really interest me that much, but they weren't necessarily bad characters. So I think that the story wasn't all that great overall. I will say there was a few interesting plot twists in the game, but overall, I would say that the characters in the main story of Soul Hackers 2 are kind of just okay. It's not really great. It's not bad. It's just kind of okay. It's just kind of there. It's nothing really special. There's many RPGs that have way better characters, way better writing, and way more interesting stories than this game. The story is overall just kind of okay. It's not anything that really stands out. So my overall thoughts on Soul Hackers 2 are that the game is okay. It's not great, but it's not bad either. The game overall is very flawed and it has a lot that holds it back. Before buying the game, I would wait for a price drop and then buy the game after the price drops. I just don't think Soul Hackers 2 is worth buying at full price. I personally don't know if I ever see myself replaying the game. It's really kind of a one and done game for me. I played through it one time, it was okay. And I really don't see myself ever replaying this game again. As always, though, I want to say a big thank you for watching the review. I really greatly appreciate it. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel and also follow me over on Twitch where I stream games that I'm playing and then I eventually review them at www.twitch.tv/Shockstorm. Thank you all so much. Everyone have a great day and I'll catch you all in the next video.